held at County Hall. Before we start, I'd just like to remind people that we're still in COVID restrictions, so where possible, if you have to wear a mask, please do. Speakers, please do not touch the microphone. When you leave, somebody will come and sanitise the desk for the next person. Also, if you hear the fire alarm, it will be for real. Just leave out of these doors, go down and congregate on the main carpet at the bottom. As you know, there is a limit to the amount of people we can have in here, so please follow the system outside where arrows dictate you to do. And members of the public who don't want to be filmed when they're speaking, please can you indicate that before you speak, so Jim there will not record you. Anyway, thank you very much, members. So, item 1, apologies and substitutes. Jason.
Chair, I've received apologies from councillors Archer, Burfoot, Elliott, and that's it, yes? Yep. And Councillor Froggatt is attending as a substitute.
Thank you very much. Just on the subject of Councillor Burfoot, unfortunately she was taken to hospital this morning, which is why she can't come. Councillor Cruz can't attend as a substitute member, and Councillor Archer is under COVID because I think his child has been near somebody with COVID, so he's isolated. So that's why we're a little bit thin on the ground tonight. Anyway, moving swiftly on. Item 2, approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. Councillor Donnelly.
I'll move, Chair.
All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Item number 3, council interest. Anybody declaring interest? Nobody's tabled anything to me?
No, Chair.
No? Anyway, public participation, item number 4. Right, now we're going to application for determination. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring item 5.6 forward and take that first, which is the change of former band hall to storage facility, B8 use, Hall, Jackson Road, Matlock. So we have a number of speakers on this. So I'll start off with Councillor Margaret Ellsworth, Matlock Town Council, to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Okay.
Yep.
So good evening, councillors. I am here to present the views of Matlock Town Council. We are wondering what the reason is for approving an application which contravenes so many of the council's own policies, and we would like you to ask officers to clearly explain how it is acceptable in this case. We have sent a detailed letter explaining our objections, and I do not have time in the 3 minutes allowed to reiterate in detail all the policies, but the main ones are PD 1B. The proposal must not cause unacceptable effects by reason of visual intrusion, overlooking, shadowing, overbearing effect, noise, light, pollution, or other adverse effects on local character and amenity. S3, safe access and adequate parking provision appropriate to the proposed use, site and its surroundings. EC1, HC19 and HC21 are all on a similar vein. It is incredible that officers can begin to argue that none of these policies have been breached. The dilapidated building is in a conservation area and surrounded on all sides by houses. Jackson Road is not wide enough to allow for delivery lorries without blocking access to residents. We would ask committee members if they would be happy to live near such a business. The applicant has been operating without planning permission for many years, and we question why the enforcement officer has not taken action to stop this illegal use before now. He has been notified many times. It is a duty which is not being carried out by Derbyshire Dales, sending the message to everyone that if you continue to operate illegally for long enough, consent will be given. The planning department needs to begin standing up to members of the public and developers who willfully deny the rules and carry on regardless. And this is not the only such example in this district. There are conditions laid out, but we are not confident, going on past experience, that they will be enforced. I hope we are wrong. Members, it is important to do what is right for the area. Ask questions, decide for yourselves, and not blindly agree with the officers or leader if you think they are wrong.
30 seconds left.
In finishing, I would point out that this is the view of Matlock Town Council, a statutory consultee, and as such I hope it will be treated with more respect than the previous time we submitted our quite legitimate concerns.
Thank you very much. Right, the next on my list is James Probert, applicant, to speak in favour of the application. Is he outside? If you want to sit down, just a reminder not to touch the microphone. You have 5 minutes and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left. Okay?
Good evening. My wife and I were offered the possibility of buying the old band hall in 2014. We thought it might be an interesting project and went ahead with the purchase. We were later advised by the accountant to transfer it into a limited company, advice which we followed. This seems to, however, trigger the accusation that we are some unscrupulous big-time developers who have no interest in the local community. My wife works at this county council. She works with looked after children. She has served long terms as governor at both Holy Trinity Primary School in Matlock, Bath, and at Highfields. She has made a significant contribution to local arts projects in the area. I have also served as a parish councillor in Matlock, Bath, and contributed to numerous projects locally, including leading professional advice to the reworking of Wirksworth Town Hall as a performance centre, and also as a lead consultant for the Level Centre for First Movement in Roseley. We've lived in Matlock Bath for over 20 years, and both our children consider themselves incredibly lucky to have gone to the primary school in Matlock Bath and secondary at Highfields. We are not uncaring developers who have no interest in the local community. Unfortunately, what we did not anticipate on buying the old band hall was the degree of resistance to change of its use and the prohibitive cost of doing anything else with the site. Hence, it perseveres in its current state. It has, however, offered a vital resource to the local business that my business partner and I have been growing since a few years before acquiring the band hall. Dave and I run an architectural design and build service. We design and build houses, extensions, major reservations for clients within 15 miles of Matlock. All our staff, whether employees or subcontractors, are from the local area. We have a policy of favouring local suppliers over the national companies, so we are significant customers for Twiggs, Markovics, Gregory Timber, to name but a few. It might also be argued that we make a significant contribution to Derbyshire Dales Planning Service. I am listed as the agent for almost 50 planning applications in Derbyshire Dales over the last few years. Incidentally, almost every single one of these was uncontroversial and approved. As a design and build company, we have also then proceeded to build almost all of those projects for our local clients and have therefore supported both our clients and their neighbours through what is often a stressful time. The old band hall has enabled us to have somewhere to store certain limited materials efficiently in between projects. We've been able to invest in small tools and equipment, knowing that we have somewhere safe and dry to store them when not in use. And we've been able to buy some smaller items in bulk so that we can offer a better service to our clients. We've also been able to hold limited items in storage for short periods whilst waiting for site to be ready. These small-scale operations have become an integral and vital part of our business. We have no requirement for heavy material deliveries on HGV vehicles. This would neither be practical or cost-effective. I admit that there have been a few occasions where unfortunately deliveries have turned up on larger vehicles and we've had to receive those deliveries. But how many of us living around here have had couriers and delivery companies turn up when we've told them repeatedly that there is limited access? Since owning the building, we have done repairs to the roof and guttering in order to preserve the core fabric of the building. We've periodically fought back the weeds and tidied the parking area. But I made a conscious decision not to do any more tidying more recently as I did not want to be accused of just doing it for the purposes of the planning committee visit. A full decoration and overhaul of the site, however, requires a significant spend, which I am only too keen to action once we have secured the safe ongoing use of the site through the approval of the change of use. I have endeavoured to ensure that all objections raised by our neighbours and their representatives have been evaluated by the relevant experts, and I have agreed to embrace any recommendations or compromise where this has been requested. I would have hoped to achieve this sooner,
30 seconds left.
both for our purposes and for the amenity of Jackson Road. But I have to admit that my focus has primarily been keeping all of our team in work and making sure our clients have roofs over their heads and homes to live in. Over this last year, that has been a major challenge. Without approval to continue to use the band hall, this will add even more pressure to our business. I ask you to approve this application not just for our business, but for the sake of Jackson Road. A refusal will turn this invaluable resource into an empty shell which has no permitted use and no reason to be maintained.
The next on my list is Mr. Roy Bradbury, the agent, to speak in favour of the application. Similarly, please do not touch the microphone. You have 5 minutes, and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chair and Councillors, for the opportunity to speak today in representation of this application. This application represents a sustainable future for the former band hall, and we welcome the officer's recommendation for approval. The use of the building for B8 storage is a valuable asset for Oakenstone, who are a well-established local firm with an excellent track record for bringing forward development locally. The firm makes an important contribution to the local economy and in turn stimulates significant additional fiscal activity through its third parties and suppliers. The building is used to store surplus building materials, plumbing fixtures, and occasionally some small plant and machinery, although it should be noted that no plant or machinery will be used in the building or on the site. Deliveries to and from the site will be loaded and unloaded by hand. The proposals are compliant with the strategic and specific policies of the development plan. This resubmission has been amended from the original application with a view to better protect the amenity of neighbouring properties. This scheme has seen the removal of the skip and previously proposed recycling centre. These amendments have been made to support the concerns of residents and to protect the character of the area. The meaningful operation of the site will now take place entirely within the building itself, with the exception of loading and unloading deliveries. No power tools will be used in the building, and no hazardous materials will be stored there. Therefore, there will be no nuisance, noise, dust, vibration, or odour that will be produced as a result of this application. We welcome the Environmental Health Officer's support in the matter, who will assess the impact of the development on the amenity of neighbouring properties closely. The change of use will not have an unacceptable impact on the safety of Jackson Road. HGVs will not make deliveries to the unit. Vehicles no larger than transit vans will visit the site, with the plans clearly demonstrating sufficient space for a vehicle to turn around and leave in a forward gear. The improvements to the access will give vehicles leaving the site appropriate visibility displays, and given the moderated speed that traffic moves along Jackson Road. We appreciate the Town Council's concern in this matter, but they must defer to the specific consultees and the Highways Authority's opinion on the matter. The site is well placed given the geographical catchment of Oakenstone's work. Furthermore, the reuse of the existing building is inherently more sustainable with regard to carbon emissions and environmental impact. The structural report confirmed the building to be in good order, as is the retaining wall which underpins it. The applicant will maintain the building as a result of permission being granted, which will prevent any deterioration in the appearance of the building that would have a negative impact on the character of the conservation area. We therefore respectfully ask the committee to support this sustainable, policy-compliant application.
Thank you very much. Right, the next person on my list is Miss Samantha Stocks to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes. Similarly, please try not to touch the microphone, and I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
Okay, well, good evening, councillors. Firstly, I'm not one to complain about anything because normally when things need doing, they've been done. But this is, I've had to come in tonight because I live next door to a holiday cottage where we have lots of tourists, and I'm now being asked by the children, what's that spooky building? That's what they call it, the spooky building, with the torn curtains and the rotting wood. I mean, it's clearly a very old building. It was an old band hall. We know that. They're avid TripAdvisor reviewers, so I'd hate for Matlock to get a bad name because obviously it's a lovely place to live. I love living here. You know, there's a public footpath that runs right by it. The cracks are visible. You know, you don't need to be a surveyor to see that. So goodness knows what the damage is like in behind the scenes. You know, there's more attention being drawn to it now that there's lots of noise. Before it was just an eyesore, but now, you know, there's scaffolding there's lots of loads, the road blocks, and this is all like 7 o'clock in the morning and sometimes on a weekend as well. You know, but really I'm just here it just has to stop really somehow. It is what it is. It's an old band hall, very old, badly built, and it's had it. And, you know, it's been said that it was an old building and needed in repair or bringing down before. It's you know, it's 2021 now, and I think it's just time. It's time for it. That's all I've got to say, really. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Right, the next on my list is Miss Lisa Hensby. She sent a letter in because she's isolating, so it'll be read out by Jason. You've got 3 minutes, Jason.
Right, thank you, Chair. I've been asked to read out the following 2 representations because the speakers are currently self-isolating in accordance with government guidance. So the first one is from Ms. Lisa Hensby. Dear committee members, I'm currently isolated, having recently returned from abroad and therefore unable to attend the meeting in person. I have read the officer's report and would like to take this opportunity to clarify a few matters and make comments. The officer has reported the hall has been used as a store since 2012. The owners from 2012 until the applicant bought the site in 2014 did not operate any businesses. No business storage took place during this period. The applicant has been using this site as a builder's yard / store since 2015 after his application to convert the site to flats. The officer has concluded a structural survey commissioned by the applicant and reviewed by an environmental officer is sufficient. Land instability is a factor in policy PD 9 of the local plan. It is not a full structural survey, which is made apparent in the report and appears to be based on opinions that because some of the cracks in the supporting walls have not got any bigger recently, that all is good. I would like the committee members to consider whether, if buying a property you notice such cracks in supporting walls, you will be happy with findings that is based on opinion, not investigation. That there is not a problem, I think not. I also do not think you would find any assurance that a structural engineer's report that has been concluded as adequate by an environmental officer is acceptable. The same doubts about these conclusions, I believe, should apply when considering this application. I would like to say that the report has totally ignored the condition of the dry stone wall to the rear of the building, mainly hidden by ivy, and the major crack in the central section of the building underneath the concrete slab the building sits on. This is important. I witnessed the engineer taking photos of these areas. He has not reported on these matters, which makes one wonder why the survey brief is confined to the walls under the car park. The officer, in her appraisal, does not mention any of the concerns of the engineer's reports commissioned by a neighbour, which is clear. Testing is required in these circumstances to prove the site and building stability and integrity for ongoing use. I think the events in Miami should be a solid reminder that land stability or otherwise should not be ignored. The officer identifies policy S3 under planning policy and legislative framework as relevant. She then fails to mention policy S3, which is arguably the most important policy in her appraisal. I am sure you're aware of this policy's contents. However, the part I believe to be particularly salient to this application is the proposed development is of a scale, density, layout and design that is compatible with the character, appearance and immediacy of the part of the settlement in which it will be located.
So, swiftly move on to the next one. Jason will read out. It's from Mr. Dean Botham.
Thank
So
you,
you have
Chair.
3 minutes similarly, and I'll let you know when you've got 30 seconds left.
This is from Mr. Dean Botham. Dear committee members, I wish to object to the proposal to change the use of the former band hall to a builder's storage B8 industrial unit. This is plainly incompatible with a residential area. My mother lives at number 3 Jackson Road. To the side of the house is a small garden area which sits alongside the band hall, separated by a narrow ginnel which runs down to Wellington Street. Although she is unable to use her garden area at the present, she should not be penalised for this because of blatant destruction of the environment surrounding her house. I would also like to enjoy this area when I return to Matlock. This is our only outdoor amenity. Vans full of builder's yard type materials going in and out all day long will severely impact upon this amenity by reason of noise, dust and will be unsightly. The change to B8 will not enhance the conservation area status and will have a significant negative effect on me, my mother's quality of life, while impacting on the safety of all residents. Kind regards, Dean Botham.
Thank you very much, Jason. Right, thank you very much. The next on my list is Mrs. Jacqueline Cass to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when it's 30 seconds left.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good evening, councillors. I'm deeply concerned about the effects this application will have on our residential amenity. We have experienced for several years the disruption caused by Oakenstone using this site as a builder's yard and have tried by way of enforcement to have this stopped for the last 2 years. I am very surprised and disappointed the officers believe this application is acceptable. It is understandable when a neighbour has work done on their house that this will cause some disruption, including loading, unloading of scaffolds, cement mixers, building and materials, etc. However, when this comes to an end, there is an improvement to be seen. This is not the case here. If ratified, this disruption will permit what is already a daily occurrence. The applicant has not made any effort to abide by his submitted proposal. Now, as you've seen with outside storage and the photographs we've submitted for you all. Oakenstone applied to build flats on this site in 2015. During this process, the applicant stated, the infill has slumped and is the cause of structural cracks on site. His planning consultant, the same planning consultant speaking this evening, said the site comprises of made-up ground with inadequate retaining walls and support. Our structural engineer is concerned that officers have not taken due regard to reports he has written and that the efficiency of the building and its associated retaining walls has been established by opinion of various people not necessarily experienced with this particular location and building. The applicant sought advice from his own engineer, who produced a partial report which has not been based on any evidential reasoning. I'm particularly concerned about the cracks under the concrete raft, which his own engineer took photographs of and never mentioned in his report, which seems a bit suspicious. His engineer also recommends the roof beams be inspected due to water ingress. This has not taken place. The flats which were approved by planning in 2015 were not built. The applicant has done nothing to maintain the
You have
building,
30 seconds
as you
left.
can see, except new gutters and patches. However, if you grant permission, history has proven he'll still leave it to go to rack and ruin. Two main dangers: structural condition of the building and retaining walls. Fire hazards with builders' storage inside, showing gas containers, petrol cans, and outside this wooden cladded building. Another consideration being the terrible look and state of the building. Also,
Thank you
the
very
total
much, Mrs.
disregard of the
Cass.
applicant to residents and the
Thank
conservation
you very
area.
much.
Thank you, everyone.
Right, the next on my list to speak on this application is Mr. Taylor. To speak against the application, you have 3 minutes, and I will indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Good evening, councillors. My concern is that I and my wife are the owners of number 25. I've lost the road now. But it's the building that's immediately downstream of the band hall. 27 Wellington Street we own, and the band hall looks down over us. We bought the property in 2001, and I have been watching the cracks in the retaining wall gradually widening over the last 20 years. The band hall was built as a band practice room, maybe 15 or 20 people meeting there twice a week to practice their music, not designed to contain hefty building materials as are described. My concern with the movability of the land, that with the extra weight in that building, it could well end up in my backyard. That's number one. Number two, the traffic around Jackson Road. The report that has been submitted suggests there's very little traffic around there, but that report was done during the COVID lockdown when everybody was at home, not driving their cars, and I must confess the people who work here in County Hall who park around Jackson Road were working presumably from home. So that report, frankly, is not worth the paper that it is written on. Another issue, which is my last issue, is the incidence of accidents around the roads of Jackson Road, etc. The information was garnered from Derbyshire Police. The Derbyshire Police are only interested in an accident where somebody has sustained injury. Nobody can travel around Jackson Road fast enough to really hurt somebody, but certainly I had a nice motorcycle that was parked in Jackson Road. I parked it there on a Saturday evening, coming back from church on Sunday morning. There it was, lying on its side, and the damage that was done was deemed beyond economic repair. So yes, there are collisions that occur, and any traffic trying to get in and out of the band site
30
I think
seconds
is
left.
very impossible to judge. They can always be able to drive forward, and I'm sure there have been collisions and they will continue to do so. So under those grounds, I really feel that this proposal of change of usage fails to meet the criteria that I hope should be applied. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Chris, John, Sarah, anything you want to come back on, Sarah?
I just wanted to, we were on site yesterday and we were discussing about the railings and what they would look like. I think an additional condition is required for details of those railings prior to their erection. So we need an additional condition. Just on highways, Highways Authority have considered all the information submitted. They're happy with the visibility displays, the swept paths of the vehicles that are, will be using the site. And obviously the Environmental Health Officer has looked at it in detail and considers it can be mitigated. Any impact on residential amenity could be mitigated by all the conditions that we've put on in terms of hours of use, no storage outside, restrictions in types of tools used, restricting the use to as applied rather than an open B8 use. And on this basis, it's recommended for approval.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, if you look, there's some late representations of it, so I'll just give you 2 or 3 minutes to read through that before we continue. Everybody happy? Right, members, we'll move on. Questions? Councillor Purdy. Yeah, if you just raise your hand, I'm sure they'll fade it in for you.
Thank you. Well, good evening, and first of all, thanks to Mr and Mrs Cass for the information and photographs you submitted. When we last visited site, I pointed out to members on the site visit that I used to live at Croft Cottage, where Mr and Mrs Cass live now. And in those days, we enjoyed the evenings with the band playing. I would not like to live there now, I have to say, but the difficulty we have is that if I raised it have objected, then we would have a clear ground for refusal. So I think we're in some difficulty here in refusing it, but I have to ask what conditions there are for storage. I've read through, and I get B8, that's all I get. The photographs from Mr and Mrs Cass show some petrol cans. So what's the restrictions on B8 and what can be stored? And I can see there's a condition for not storing outside, but what can be stored inside?
Described, they've detailed it in, so I've tied it down to what they have described in their application, and that really is a builder's store for plumbing fixings, screws fixings, tools and small plant. They have specified exactly what they will store in there, and I've tied that with the condition. So what we didn't want is that it to be an open B8. We've sought to tie it to this particular company and what they've specified that they will use it for and the type of tools.
I appreciate that, Sarah, but my concern is those photographs show petrol cans. Surely we're not allowing flammable liquid into that building.
That is not specified for within their information, no.
Okay, thank you.
Any more members wanted to ask questions? Councillor Gamble.
Again, is my mic on? Yeah, sorry. Just follow up to Councillor Purdy's question actually about when you just gave us a list of some things that could be put in there. You said small plant. What do we mean by small plant?
It's concrete mixers and concrete mixers and wheelbarrows. That's what it's stated as.
I'm just thinking, what you mean, I'm just thinking that well, obviously there were some things that people, if there's a gas canister attached to something, or is that excluded, or if he suddenly got a piece of small plant that had a gas canister? Or something that worked on petrol, that needed a petrol
They've
can?
given me a list of
John,
things
could
that are
you,
likely to be in the building.
Could you, yeah, of course you can, John.
At this stage, Chair, I think, you know, residents and members might legitimately be concerned about what gets stored in the building, but we're considering the merits of the planning application and not things controlled by other legislation. Clearly, it's the responsibility of the building user to make sure that storage is done safely and for other people to enforce the safety of that storage and not ourselves.
Well, I asked the question really because we are being asked to approve this on the basis that there is a planning controlled list of what's stored in there. So you're saying you're not going to control what's in the building now via planning, you're going to expect other agencies to control what's stored there?
I think what I'm saying is if you've got a particular concern over fire regulations and the danger of items stored in there, that is a matter for the Fire Authority and the Health and Safety Executive and not for the Planning Authority.
So just to confirm, you won't be looking at what he stores in there via planning, it will be via other organisations?
We will expect him to comply with what's in the list that's agreed. I say if there's a particular item that causes a concern for members of the public around fire safety, that is something that's logically taken up by the Fire Authority.
Small plant is a very generic term. Small plant can mean almost... Plant is just a word for a machine. I mean, I work in plant. We use plant as a general word to use what we sell. We sell a wide variety of things. Plant is not a description of something. Plant is plant is basically another word for machine.
I think I've given you the best answer I can in response to that, Councillor Gamble.
So
I can't explain that any further. So.
Right, okay, so we're not...
Councillor Purdy.
Oh, wait a minute, so can I have another question, please? You said, have I got to ask all my questions now?
You can do.
Can I ask more later if I haven't asked them? I didn't. Can I have in other meetings? I get restricted. So, thank you. In that case, Councillor Purdy, like to come back.
Thanks, Chair. I'm sorry, I forgot to ask the question about the air of doubt on the crack. I have to say that it has widened since we lived there, and we don't seem to have any qualified report on this. We have opinion. I guess that's not going to come into this planning issue, John. I'm sure that's what you're going to say, but it does create that air of doubt. I wouldn't refer to Florida as an issue here, but I do have some concerns about the structure and the integrity of it. How can we be satisfied, the Planning Committee be satisfied with an authoritative report?
Well, we've had a report from the applicant that has been referred onto Derbyshire Building Control for assessment. My understanding is they don't see any imminent problem with the structural integrity of the building. I think you've got to decide what's proportionate in the particular planning circumstances that you're looking at. A responsible building owner would want to monitor any cracks in that wall, but the building has been there for a considerable period of time. So I think it's proportionate and reasonable to take the reports that we've received and accept their conclusions in this particular set of circumstances. That doesn't mean it's not reasonable to take an interest in that, but I think it would be unreasonable in these circumstances to expect an invasive report to check the material under there.
Okay, thanks.
Got a couple of questions. One's about the structural integrity. I'm not quite sure why that's got anything to do with planning, but if it has, it has. Can we expect them to insure it against falling on somebody? And if we do expect them to insure it against falling on somebody, isn't that kind of over to them and not our problem anymore? And my other question was, it doesn't seem to be as a thing, the band practice space, it doesn't seem as a thing to be really working where it is, doing what it's doing for the people in the area, for the town council, for the civic society. And it is working for the people that own it and use it, but presumably they could actually do what they're doing, store something. They could store something somewhere else. So could we ask them to store things there for another year, 2 years, and move on, and just only give them planning application for storage for 2 years, and then ask them to come back and see if they can come up with a better plan? I don't know what our options are really in the planning world, but those are ideas that I'd like to consider.
Just taking those 2 points. The first one around insurance, yes, you would expect a building owner to insure their property, and for that to essentially be a civil matter and not a planning matter. In terms of whether it's reasonable to control the use, you would only normally grant a temporary planning permission if you wanted to give something a trial run. So if you thought you got a potentially noisy or antisocial use, but you felt a responsible user of the building might be able to carry that out in a way that doesn't impact on amenity, you might consider that. I don't actually think it's the right thing to do in this instance. I think the building can improve its appearance through having a secure use. It's then down to the building owner to decide in the future as to whether they want to redevelop the site for another purpose. But we can't drive that process, I'm afraid.
Can I just come back? So it is okay, it is sometimes we do allow a temporary usage if it's working, and it seems the applicants have come up with a plan which they hope is going to work with the local people. So could we just do it to, let the local people get back to us in 2 years' time and say, yeah, that's fine, they're playing the game and we're okay?
It's not what we're recommending, but at the same time, it's not completely unreasonable in planning terms.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. This is an existing business, really. It's been running a great number of years, but if it was a new business setting up in a residential area where it is, would the approval wouldn't be opposite, would it? I know it's a bit hypothetical, but we wouldn't approve a new business setting up there in a residential area.
I think what you've got to appreciate is the way towns like Matlock have evolved over the years, is they quite often will have residential uses and other uses in close proximity to one another. Vast majority of the time they manage to coexist without a problem. Typically modern residential development is a monoculture, isn't it? You don't get that mix of users in most modern residential estates. But in theory, a low-key industrial use is something that can coexist with housing if carried out in the right way.
Right, okay.
Councillor Gamble.
Okay, it's just still questions, isn't it? Do we do, I'm sorry because I'm new to this. Do we do comment later? Is it questions first?
Questions first, then we'll move into debate.
Thank you. Right, I'd just like to ask the officers how well they think this policy meets S3, that a proposed development is of a scale, density, layout and design that is compatible with the character, appearance and amenity and part of the settlement in which it is located. And also, if I can ask them, how they feel that it complies with policy S3D, that a proposed development retains any existing buildings that make a positive contribution to the character and appearance of the settlement. And also, again, how it meets policy S3E, that the access is safe and that the highway network can satisfactorily accommodate traffic generated by the development or can be improved as part of the development, and also how it complies with policy S3F, has a layout, access and parking provision appropriate to the proposed use, site and surroundings. If you could answer that, please. Thank you.
Well, we think in general terms, yes, the policies are complied with. I think some of those policies are very much geared to new development, where we're considering clear site and new development. What we're considering here is the reuse of an existing building.
D, it says any existing building that make a positive contribution to the character.
That's where you're looking to redevelop a site and you've got existing buildings on there that might be of character and might be worth retaining.
So are you saying this existing building is of sufficiently good character that it's worth retaining?
We've been offered an application to put it to another use. It has existing use rights. It could continue in its existing use irrespective of this planning application.
It might do, but I'm asking you if you feel that it makes a positive contribution to the character and appearance of the settlement. Can you just say yes or no?
That section of the policy isn't relevant to the consideration of this particular application.
It isn't.
We're considering the use of the existing building.
But it's at this D, it says existing building.
I think I've answered the question, Chair, as best I can.
Yeah, thank you very much. Anyway, now we'll move into debate, members. Oh, sorry, Colin.
My questions, there were 3 or 4, some of which have been answered. Particularly, I'm over concerned about the structure of the building. Can I ask a question regarding planning history? We're being, and this may seem like a silly question, perhaps I've missed something, but we're being asked tonight to consider the change of use to a storage unit, but I'm already hearing how it's being used as a storage unit. Has that been agreed in the past? I can see the planning history, but obviously I don't understand what all the letters and so on mean. And the other question regarding the planning history, please can you tell me if any of the applications for change of use to apartments were approved, please? I want to come back with another question if I may.
Can I fill you in on the history of use for storage? Basically, and I think it was picked up by some of the early speakers, we have previously been investigating whether the building has been in use for storage as a builder's store for the builder's operation. Often when we go through that process of trying to establish the use, we serve something called a planning contravention notice, which is a series of structured questions to ask to a site owner exactly how they're using a building. So it became apparent through that it was being used as a builder's store. We've had a previous application to try and regularise the use. That was delayed because they couldn't carry out a traffic survey and they withdrew the application. The current application again seeks to regularise that existing use. So it's been in use as a builder's store for some time, but without the benefit of planning permission.
Thank you. And one of the speakers raised the point of the highways inspection of the road to see whether it was appropriate for this application, and they raised the point that it was carried out during the COVID lockdown. Do we know if that is accurate, if it is true? Because we seem to be hearing one thing from highways and one thing from the local people on the road as to the use of, how heavily used the road is by traffic and other vehicles.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say that the survey work that's been carried out is satisfactory to the Highway Authority, irrespective of when it was carried out. And I think there was an interesting point made by, I think it was the last speaker, in terms of anybody that's been to the site and been to that part of Matlock knows that the roads are congested. And that creates its own problems, but one of the benefits of that in terms of highway safety is it reduces traffic speed significantly, to the point where the Highway Authority, even though the visibility in and out of the access might not be ideal in a faster moving highway situation, is acceptable in that locality.
Sorry, can you hear at the about. I'm conscious they can't hear. And I know they can't move closer to us, but I'm trying to hear as well. And it's difficult once you turn the sound up.
Can we turn it up a bit?
I'm finished anyway.
You don't want to come back on anything, Colin? That's
Yep,
all right,
I'm
then. Right, so we'll move into debate, members. Councillor Gamble.
I mean, I know obviously we all going to have our own definition of what contributes to an area and what makes a positive contribution. I really can't see that this building does. It concerns me that we're now sort of extending the life of a building which was built in 1970 to last 25 years. We're now 25 years on from that. It's undoubtedly an eyesore. I don't think anybody surely could make any argument this contributes to the conservation area that it sits in. It is also, whether it generates traffic movement in the sense that it upsets highways, but it is going to impact on the parking and the amenity of the residents of Jackson Road, undoubtedly. And almost anything that happens there seems to affect what happens on Jackson Road, as we witnessed on the site visit when a neighbour had something delivered that blocked up the road, and had one councillor wasn't very happy with, and I got scowled at as I left, as I tried to give the person delivering some room on the road. I am slightly worried by this letter from Robert Morton as well. We seem to be putting an awful lot of importance onto a report that basically says we went to see the building, we looked at it, we've written quite a lot of things that say if something happens it's not due to us. We quite clearly, I think even as they say it's a single visit, visual inspection, no testing of material, monitoring, breaking out or long-term investigation. They even state in the report that they are unable to report any part of the property as free from defect due to that. Obviously some questions are raised by Robert Morton. He seems to be a very qualified person. Why we haven't put more weight onto that in the report, I'm really... and I can't understand really, and why we are not coming to why we didn't actually, in doing this application, put more into the points that Mr. Morton makes, that surely you decided that something is fit for purpose before you pass it. You don't pass it and then say, oh, by the way, would you want, like once a year to do a visual inspection and make sure it was fit for purpose? That seems the wrong way round entirely to me. In terms of, what worries me slightly as well is about we got conditions that were stated that we are going to say that you can only keep small plant, whatever small plant eventually gets defined as. But how are we going to know what's in a building? Will we be visiting it regularly to see what's in this building? How will we know? How will we actually meet that condition that says we know what's in that building? I think there's a few issues we haven't looked sufficiently carefully at. Fire safety, for a start. Why we didn't put a fire safety consultation in place when we got something which, again, the small plant may have a gas canister, may have a petrol can that fuels it, and we're in a wooden building. We don't seem to have done any investigation to what that wooden building is made of, whether if anything did happen, and let's hope it doesn't. But if there was an explosion, is there asbestos in that building? It's 70s. It's a common ingredient in 70s buildings. And I just don't feel that it does meet the policies that we say it does. I don't think it contributes to the conservation area under PD1. I don't think under SC3 it is of a scale, density, layout and design compatible with the character, appearance and amenity of the settlement it's located in. I don't think it provides a safe highway network. As we've already discussed, it's on a completely congested road, which was evident from the site visit, with the problems we had parking. And we also, I mean, and actually it's something else that seems to have disappeared as well. We talk about the environment officer who apparently gave consent to this. One of the conditions that the environment officer in the report was asked for was to be a condition to limit any deliveries to a 3.5 LGV van. That seems to have disappeared. I just wonder why. Is there any reason that's disappeared? And then again, I mean, the judge, as one of the I think it was Mrs. Cass, wasn't it, said, you know, this debate over this structure. I mean, we've got a visual report. We've got a previous report from the actual applicant who says the infill has slumped and that this is the case of structural camp, which he knows because he's a professional builder. So has his professional opinion changed now? And really, I can't understand why we're creating more life for a building, really, that's just seen the end of its life.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gamble. Anybody else? Councillor Purdy.
Chair is probably one of the longest serving planning committee members here, apart from Councillor Donnelly. I have to say that I fully sympathise with all the concerns around this, but we have to ask the question, on what grounds can we refuse it? And I don't think we have any. We have concerns, we have issues. I think that the structure needs investigating. I'm sure that's down to the owner, and I'm sure the owner is a responsible person and would want his own building to be safe. So I rely on the owner to investigate that and ensure safety. I do have a concern, though, about the 3.5-tonne vehicles, if we could condition that. I think that we need to limit it to specific vehicles. If there's any chance also of us checking on the content of this building at some stage, is there any way we can condition that? If so, I'm prepared to move officer recommendations, reluctantly, because I understand the concerns. But I have to say to the people here, we have to see on what grounds we have to refuse. And I think that if we did refuse, I think the applicant would win at appeal. So I think the anomalies, I think the issues, I like to think they can be sorted out with common good by the owner to his neighbours, to be a good neighbour, to ensure there's no out-of-hours working, to ensure there's no undue noise, to ensure that the fabric of the building is presented in a much better decor than it is at the moment. So those kind of issues I feel can be sorted, and on that basis, Chair, I think the officers have got this right. It is right that the fire service should investigate if there are any flammable liquids and so forth. I raise that question to bring it to attention, not to say we should do something about it. So I think that we're in difficulty, Matlock Town Council. You have to see what grounds you have for refusal. And I thoroughly believe the officers have got this right in all respects, but the issues that are of concern, I think, can be addressed.
John, do you want to come back on the 3.5 limit for deliveries?
Yeah.
I don't think there is a limit on the road.
I think the dilemma we have in trying to impose any limit on the weight of vehicles is, as people are aware, the very nature of deliveries these days. You sometimes get small items delivered off the back of large lorries, and that happens all of the time. I think you have to take it on face value when the applicant says the way they operate their business will be from vans and smaller vehicles, but there will be times, I'm sure, occasionally when things get delivered from larger vehicles. And I think provided that's done in a safe manner, I don't think that is a particular concern if it happens very occasionally.
Okay, I've set that, John, and obviously the owner applicant has got all these messages tonight, and I'm sure he'll take them on board. Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I'm happy to, well, not particularly happy, but to second the application, I see where many of the people coming regarding the storage, etc., but there are very stringent restrictions on what you can. When I heard the word petrol cans mentioned, I was quite perturbed by that. But there are restrictions that apply, as my colleague Stuart as well, being fire service, would tell you. The thing I asked for yesterday, I asked Sarah up at the site visit, regarding the fencing, and that was granted the condition of steel fencing because that was a little bit of a, danger, I think, with this wooden fencing there. But I think when I was mentioned yesterday, they'd be on about transit vans. I didn't hear anything on numbers or size. Maybe I'm wrong. It's one of those that I think it'd be very difficult for us to turn this application down tonight because I was at the regional application, as probably Gary was and others were, and when we granted, was it 2015?
Yeah.
It was given then, so, it's gone on. On the structural side as well, I think that, again, my colleague Stuart would probably be more inclined to agree with me on this, is that the actual structure itself is built on a raft. So it's not going to just slide down the valley. I mean, I think people who are concerned, the actual cracks on the wall are in the wall, I believe. And if something's built on a raft, it's rafted, it's not going to float away, that's for sure. But again, I think I would like to see the place tidied up. And hopefully that, it's that they will use it as they say for storage, but for certain storage items rather than, But I think there's an element of control there that we're quite happy to go with, and whether it's the fire service or whoever it is. And so, for that reason, I will support the application. Second that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Only. Councillor Buttle.
Thank you, Chair. I get the feeling that we're going to approve this. So I'm wondering if we can condition something. I was wondering if we could condition a good, solid fence, something that makes a difference to the noise that people in the area have to suffer. Like we've done the same with the dog breeder. Can we not do the same with this?
It's already conditioned. I think Sarah might be able to. I think we've added the condition for this.
It was to do with railings that are specified on here.
So was that no? I'm sorry, I didn't catch it.
It's railings that are specified. It's not to do with noise, it's safety to replace the wooden panelled fencing that's there. So it would be railings which would be, open.
Yes, that sounds like it's not going to do the work that the people that live adjacent to it would really like to have done. Just an idea. I don't know if anybody thinks this would help the people locally, whether or not they would like the idea of a fence, I don't know.
Okay, well, I've got nobody else down on my list. It's been moved and seconded for approval. So, members, down to you. All those in favour, please show. All those against? Any abstentions? So it's been carried. It's been approved. Thank you very much, members. So now we go back to our original item on the agenda, item 5.1. And this is application number 20/00893. It's the full application. Rosarium, Clifton Road, Ashbourne, DE6, 1DT. Erection of 10 number dwellings with associated access car parking, regrading of site levels and retaining walls. So, have got anybody to speak on this? There's no speakers on this list for this item, so we'll go straight to Chris.
I'll just wait. Oh, perfect. It's okay. Ahead of the meeting, we circulated to members a copy of the slideshow presentation. So members should have had opportunity to review that and have a look at the photographs and the development proposal that's before members this evening. Members will also note that this is quite a prominent site. Those that live and pass through Ashbourne, just off Clifton Road, immediately opposite a former engine shed building, which is Grade 2 listed. The application site includes the land edged red on the plan on the presentation currently, but the land within the applicant's control does extend to include all of the land edged blue on this particular plan. And members will note the recommendation is to approve the application subject to conditions, but also Section 106 planning obligation agreement to secure education contributions, but also to prohibit further development of the site without making a contribution towards affordable housing. So if members are supportive of this application, it is subject to authority being delegated to development manager to secure that Section 106 agreement and the conditions that are recommended and set out in the officer's report. I'll just quickly, just for members' benefit, just show the layout of this development. This is the amended plan. So what we're essentially presented with is a series of semi-detached dwellings which all front Clifton Road. 10 dwellings in total. You'll note from the officer's report the mix of housing comprises 2-bedroomed properties, 3-bedroomed and 2 4-bedroomed houses. Relatively simple design, simple forms, address the street. And from the photographs you can see you've got quite an established high landau hedge on the frontage and remnants of what we think is a wall to a glass house which fronts the road currently. So if you can just imagine in that photograph there, the landau hedge and the wall to be removed and a series of houses, semi-detached houses, presenting themselves to the road in that location. Happy to take questions at this stage.
Right, members, questions? Councillor Fitzherbert.
I just wondered, is it due to COVID that it's taken so long to get to this committee, really? Because I just rather feel that I know one or two things have taken a bit more time. I just wondered if that was the reason, really.
There's a number of reasons. This particular application did trigger a debate as to whether contributions towards affordable housing would be required on the back of the amount of development proposed. It is 10 units, but our policy requires a contribution in respect of developments of 11 dwellings or more. So we had to resolve that issue. There are ongoing discussions about education contributions and also the applicant's willingness to enter into a Section 106 agreement to prohibit further development of the wider site without having to make a contribution towards such things as affordable housing. So that has resulted in delay, as has the need to address some of the representations received and also some of the consultation responses it received from Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. You'll note that an ecological report has been prepared and a net biodiversity gain assessment carried out satisfied Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. So there's various technical matters and also fundamental planning reasons as to why there has been delay with this particular application. But we're happy that we've addressed all those matters now and it's safe and it's the right recommendation in officer's opinion to recommend approval.
Okay, I'm happy to move. I'm happy to be in the debate when available.
Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. A few questions. It refers to efficient boilers, etc. The question is, what kind of boiler? Is it gas or electric? Because we all know very well that gas are carbon breeders, aren't they, really? So we want to get away from gas. That's the idea for, we've got to do it. Also, there's a piece of natural solar gain. Well, is that solar panels or just some fancy word for saying it's facing to the sun?
I wouldn't know. I think Chris might answer that for you.
Natural solar gain. So what is natural solar gain?
Yeah, my reading.
It's not solar panels, is it?
Yeah, my reading of that statement is that basically the houses have been orientated in a manner which allows for the retrospective installation of solar panels. So the roof planes are facing in a southerly direction.
Facing the sun, right? There's no solar panels mentioned,
not as part of this application.
No, that's another down one for it. Also, you mentioned about affordable housing, but in that area, is it 8 and over should have affordable housing? 8 properties or over should have affordable housing?
We're in a defined settlement here, so it's major development. So the local plan requires developments of 11 or more units to deliver 30% affordable housing. Yeah. So we're dealing with the developments of 10.
So if they do want to build some more, they've got to contribute to affordable housing and either build some more or
we're conscious that the applicant's land ownership extends to include additional land, and what we wouldn't want to happen is for that development of that wider land to come forward at a later date and as to not secured benefits and potential contributions towards affordable housing. So that's why we're recommending a legal agreement to ensure that doesn't happen going forward.
Can you tell me what kind of boilers they are? Are they electrical, gas?
You're asking me an extremely difficult question to answer. I think we have to assume the gas boilers, but it's very much depends on what building regulations require. But they've identified a highly efficient boiler, so whether that's used burning fossil fuels or not is an unknown. I think we have to assume worst case scenario could potentially be a gas boiler.
Yeah, for 10 dwellings like this, it could be deep borehole heating, really. You know, it's lots of ways, but it's the cheapest gas, but it's totally inefficient today. We got to reduce this carbon output, as we all know, so I'm against it if it's a gas boiler.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Slack. I've got nobody else down for... Oh, they all go up then all of a sudden. Councillor Lees.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Could you just clarify, you know, the 34,353, has that been done away with now for the St Oswald's School, or is that still part of the equation that's in the contribution for this development? That's one question. And the other question is, just going back to Councillor Slack's, I do believe now with the construction industry, which I'm trying to get out of myself, every new bill now is making them put the facility in for a three-phase electric supply for the benefit of the carbon reduction and going towards electric with everything else. And also, I'd just like to see whether we could put a condition on. They look a bit plain, these houses do. Could we put a condition that they had a false chimney on, which is one of our pet hates in Ashbourne? They haven't got chimneys on.
Just to clarify, there is already a condition that the dwelling should incorporate chimneys, so we're asking for chimneys to be sited on the gable end.
It didn't show them on your slideshow, did it?
There's recognition there isn't chimneys on the buildings at the moment, but we are recommending a condition to secure chimneys on the gable ends of the properties that are proposed. With regards to the contribution towards primary school places, I just refer you to paragraph 5.4 of the officer's report, because it does explain the circumstances behind why a contribution was initially sought by the County Council's strategic planning team, and then the reasons why they reviewed that position. And just to answer the question, we are now just seeking a contribution towards secondary school education facilities, so secondary school places on the back of this application, and those circumstances are explained at paragraph 5.4.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Buttle.
Yes, development manager. Devolving this to the development manager to make the agreement. Is that Officer Bradbury? It is, yes. Okay, Officer Bradbury.
It falls on John's shoulders.
When you do this, will you be able to do things like specify we'd like the builds, the houses, the units, whatever we call them, to be green technology retrofit ready? So can we say we want a big enough space for a hot water tank?
You're only delegating authority to me to issue the decision based on the conditions that are in the report and subject to those items that are itemised in the potential legal agreement, i.e. the education contribution and preventing further development without meeting obligations for things like affordable housing. It's not there to specify higher environmental standards in terms of the build. I think we're going through a transition at the moment in terms of educating developers and also applying our draft supplementary guidance on climate change. So over a period of time, hopefully, you'll see applications perform better and better against your aspirations in terms of that. But that's not something that we should include in this 106 agreement.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, could you put a footnote on the application, on the decision notice, John? You know, just reminding them of the fact, you know, any sort of green energies. I know it's not a requirement, but you know, we have used it in the past just to see if they'll do it off their own bat.
I don't see a problem with that being included as good practice.
Thank you very much.
Right, lovely. Councillor Donnelly. Not yet, but if So I've got nobody down for questions, so I'll tell you, I'll move to debate. So, yeah, of course you can, yeah.
Can that contribution couldn't be brought back into the St Oswald's, or is that totally out of the equation now? Because it's not a matter of now; it's a matter of the future, whether that's going to be used with that for that school. Everything's, they've just had a development on that site of the school, and as the town's growing, they're going to need more and more school premises. So I just wondered if that was something that could be brought back in with this application.
Yeah, the issue with the primary school contribution is that the strategic planners at the County Council have accepted that it wouldn't be SIL regulations compliant. In that respect, a contribution towards primary school places would be legally flawed and challengeable. So we can't insist on that contribution being made in this case.
Thank you. To answer your question, Councillor Lees. So now I'll move into debate. Councillor Fitzherbert.
To move this, please. I mean, I visited the site because I was unable to go yesterday, and although I've driven past this zillions of times, I wasn't quite aware of what was there, and we need to regularise it and sort this area out. It does look a bit of an eyesore, and I think this is a cracking application. I'd like to move it, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fitzherbert. Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I know the area very well. It is in my ward, and I recall over the years when it used to be the Rosarian, but this plot has been barren for many, many years, and I'm quite happy and delighted actually to make some particular use, and I think that the house is looking on the plan, everything that's going to be quite useful as well to the area. So I'm also happy as well that Councillor Lees has asked for chimneys on the plot as well, because I'm like him, I'm a very chimney fetish as well. So I'm happy to move the second application.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Lees.
Thank you, Chair. I know I was just going to second it, but I'm happy to support this application. And it's been like Councillor Fitzherbert said, it's been an overgrown eyesore for many years. So.
Councillor Purdy.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to just add to the debate on central heating and the green issue. I think members have to appreciate that we're in, as John said, a transformational period. And we've actually met a developer on site in Matlock this morning who's got green plans, and which is good to hear. So I think if anybody was to move now to electric heating, you'd be cold, because they only put out 50% of the heat output of a boiler. And what the boiler industry is doing, such as Valor, which is only down the road at Delpa, are moving high technology. They are more efficient, and they'll be moving to hydrogen boilers soon. So we're in that period where, yes, we need to go green, but we can't leap into the unknown and create, something that's not there. So I think members need to be a bit patient, but it's happening. And especially where you can see now, many of these papers dictate airtight buildings, and that's the point. Don't be putting heating in if it's going to escape. So that's the move by the industry, more so than the actual heating.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Purdy. There's nobody else down on my list for debate. So it's been moved as the recommendation set out in the report that authority be delegated to the development manager to grant permission. So all those in favour, please show. All those against? And any abstentions? So that's been approved. Thank you very much. Moving swiftly on now, members, to item 5.2, which is Lees Farm. Application number 20/01189 full. Lees Farm, Warneston Road, Ashbourne, D61NB. Hybrid planning application comprising a full plan application for the demolition of existing buildings and erection of a care home. Class use C2 with associated parking, access and landscaping, and outline planning application for the erection of up to 9 dwelling houses, with approval being sought for access. Now, we have on my list, we have 3 speakers for this. Thank you very much. So I've got 3 on my list. The first person on my list for this application is Duncan Ford, the applicant, Perseus Land Developments Limited, to speak on it. You have 5 minutes, and when there's 30 seconds left, I'll indicate. Please do not touch the microphone. Okay? Thank you very much.
Okay, good evening. I'm Duncan Ford. I'm Managing Director of Perseus Land and Developments, the applicant. My company specialises in the development of purpose-built care homes for the elderly on behalf of really a wide range of organisations, including both private and not-for-profit care operators. There are just 2 points I would like to raise this evening, one on design and the other on social need. In terms of design, and in recognising this is an important site which demands a bespoke building and landscaping scheme, we attended the East Midlands Design Review panel for its advice. But for reasons unknown, this was not mentioned in the committee report in front of you. The DRP made very clear in its formal consultation response that it is not opposed to the demolition of the existing buildings on the site, and should the demolition of the same materialise, any attempt to replicate the form of the existing farmhouse would not be supported on the basis that it would, and I quote, be a meaningless gesture that would lack integrity. The DRP added, and again I quote, the panel is supportive of the overall architectural design approach undertaken and the resulting overall aesthetic. Since then, we have worked very hard indeed with officers to respond to their concerns, and the scheme design has been through many iterations to take account of the opinions of many different stakeholders, resulting in a light and airy care home arranged within generous landscape grounds. This is fully depicted in the members' briefing note, which was circulated prior to this meeting by our planning consultants, I understand. The proposed housing is, of course, in outline form, so the layout and window locations are reserved matters for agreement in the future. The officer recognises that the rear part of the site is capable of accommodating 9 dwellings without representing harm to the amenity or privacy of neighbouring residents, and we would welcome a condition which limits the height of these homes to 2 stories rather than the 2.5 stories as is currently proposed. Some concern has been raised over the relationship between the proposed care home and the existing houses on Premier Avenue to the north. We have therefore provided the officer with a plan showing the separation distances involved. This confirms there is a distance of 20 metres between the balconies of the care home and the nearest habitable window. We would argue that this is entirely reasonable on the basis that it represents a greater separation distances than exist on the new Red Row Homes development to the south. We would therefore urge the planning officer to share this plan with you at this meeting, as we do believe it is salient in this matter. Turning to the matter of social need, you might ask why it is that we, our intended operators, and indeed Derbyshire County Council Social Services are all firmly of the view that there is an urgent need for a new purpose-built care home in Ashbourne. Well, there are only 2 existing care homes in the town, representing 92 bedrooms in total. Of these bed spaces, 57 have ensuite equipped bathrooms with a toilet and wash-hand basin, and just 3 have full wet room facilities including a shower. Put another way, there are currently up to 35 people living in Ashbourne's care homes who will need to leave their bedrooms in order to access a toilet, and 89 people who will need to leave their rooms in order to access shower facilities. This is not how we believe the frail older people of Ashbourne should be living.
Left.
I've visited many existing care homes run by our operating partners since the start of the pandemic, and the resounding message I receive from their operational staff is that the safeguarding of residents against the current and future pandemics is a lot more effective in purpose-built care homes offering full wet room facilities than it is in older care homes where people have to leave their rooms in order to access toilet and
Thank you very much, Mr. Ford.
Thank you.
The next person on my list is Max Jeffrey, local resident, to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes, and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Max Jeffrey. My family and I live at 7 Premier Avenue. We object to this planning application because of its fundamentally negative impact on us, our house, our neighbours and our neighbourhood overall. We are not against planning or building on this plot altogether. However, this proposal and its previous versions represent, in our opinion, clear overdevelopment. It's too big and too tall. It is 3 stories high, 55% higher than anything else in this residential area, and it's twice the height of the farm building that it replaces. 24 residents will look directly into our whole garden. Our neighbours at number 3, Joe and Andrew, being central to the whole 200-foot-long, 40-foot-high development, are even more severely affected by this than us. They would have been here if it weren't for COVID. Our concerns have not been fundamentally taken into account by the developer, and in the latest submission on Friday, they reference only having had a very small number of representations. To our knowledge, 100% of the properties directly affected have engaged and have objected. 3/4 of all the windows and our conservatory, of course, will be directly looked from above by this development. As a chartered engineer, I have a good understanding of the plans proposed. This proposal places all of the site's main facilities and vehicle access within 5 to 15 metres of our back door. We did appreciate the health team's recommendations that conditions be placed to working hours, but we cannot see how this would work. If permitted, this development would fundamentally change our neighbourhood for the worse, especially as it replaces the 200-year-old farm building, which does bring a unique character to our neighbourhood. We do hope that the issues raised, especially in section 7.12 through to 7.19 in the officer's report to the committee, will be understood and actioned by all those who review this application. 2 final points. The roads, the junction at the top of Premier Avenue has got busier and busier. Our concern is not for parking or traffic, but fundamentally for the hundreds of children who we wish to walk to and from school, both the growing school Hilltop and, of course, the grammar school. And I know how critical this is as previous chair of governors at Queggs, how important this is to protect. Finally, the 9 houses can't really be seen as credible in our opinion as they get squeezed into that last little space, simply because they are squeezed into that little space at the end. So we would request that the committee decline this proposal and that you take every possible to make sure...
Thank you very much. Time's up, sorry.
Yep.
The next person on my list is Sharon McGowan. McGowan, sorry. You have 3 minutes, and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. My name is Sharon McGowan. I live in Premier Avenue, Ashbourne, in number 9. I've lived there for almost 30 years now. I'm a professional engineer by vocation. I'm a quality and health and safety executive for Rolls-Royce in Derby. I object to the plan on 4 grounds.
Okay, the plan is incomplete and inaccurate. I am adjacent to the property, but I'm not listed as being impacted by this property. I don't understand how we can have plans that have missed properties that are literally adjacent to them. I'm not identified as being impacted. Clearly I am. I'm right beside the 9 houses they're talking about. My house, which is a single property, is adjacent to where the plan identifies 9 new homes. Now, the 9 new homes are trying to be squashed into a smaller plot size than my one single home. So dimensionally, I have issues with the perimeter and the calculations. If you look at the plans that have been demonstrated, the plans actually eat into neighbours' gardens. The plans are not dimensionally correct. So the measurements need to be verified and checked. And just look at the neighbourhood positions on there, okay? My next point is trees. My property is adjacent to 4 40-foot, 150-year-old, at least, Scots pines trees. These are ancient trees which are rightly protected. The planning has inadequately assessed the impact on these trees. It has not assessed how 9 homes will be built over the roots of these trees. They are on the access path. There's only one way to get into the property and build these, which is over the roots of those protected trees. Now, the plan, the assessment that was done looked at the mix of planting and the type of trees to go on the front and the back. They didn't ask the specific question, how will these trees be protected from this development? Will that area be used for storage of rubble and all the rest of it, the building materials? Because that's the likely storage area for all of the debris as they build. They cannot go on top of the roots of protected trees. And if you look at the plan, there just isn't dimensionally the space to do it. So I really challenge the planning as inadequate. My third is a serious HS&E concern. It's a real health impact if incorrectly conducted. The building contains asbestos. The plans do not include adequate instructions or controls for the removal of asbestos. I reject this on the ground of inadequate provision for asbestos removal. I don't think it's been fully understood. I don't think they've looked at the risk assessment for asbestos removal. They haven't assessed the impact on the local school, which is literally hundreds of feet away from where this asbestos will be removed. I have a young daughter. Obviously, we don't want that to be an issue. So I'd like to understand what the budget is for that. Is it adequate? And what are the precautions that are being taken? And if necessary, I'll take it to the Health and Safety Executive for the UK.
Thank you. You've had your 3 minutes.
Lovely, thank you.
Right. Chris, John, is there anything you want to come back on?
Thank you, Chair. A number of points that I do need to come back on, but first of all, I'd just like to draw members' attention to the late representation sheet and a short note that was circulated to members ahead of this meeting. Now, I'm assuming members have read that. It relates to the development taking place. It's this document. I'm still there. That document sets out the proposed development, the need for care home in the locality, and also sets out the approach, the design approach, and the impact on the amenity of the occupants of nearby residential properties. The first speaker did mention that they have also prepared a plan which indicates the distances between windows and balconies serving the proposed care home, and also habitable and non-habitable windows of the dwellings on the northwestern boundary. Now, members were able or benefited yesterday from a visit to this particular site, so could gauge the distances between the proposed building, the care home building in particular, and existing residential properties along Premier Avenue. Members will note from the officer's report there is general support in principle for redevelopment of this site. We recognise that the existing building, the farmhouse and farm buildings, are of some historic interest and quality, and you'll note that we've gauged them as being non-designated heritage assets. For those people that know this part of Ashbourne, this particular side of Ashbourne comprised farm buildings and farmhouses and countryside beyond. And the island of this site represents an island of what is technically countryside, surrounded by existing residential development. It's not defined settlement framework boundary, but we do accept that it is surrounded by existing development, and we are in principle supportive of some redevelopment of the site. The issue that we have is that the overall footprint of this building, its size and relationship to existing adjacent development is such that it's uncharacteristic form of development that represents, in officers' opinion, overdevelopment and development that's out of scale and character with its surroundings, but also has an unacceptable, overbearing, oppressive impact on the neighbouring properties to the north. Members are able to gauge that on site. I've circulated the presentation ahead of this meeting, so I don't plan to go through the presentation in detail, but I'll just show members for the benefit the general footprint of the care home building. It's a 64-bed care home. They're the existing farm buildings on this particular site and the farmhouse. You'll note of some architectural and historic interest. And then you get an idea here as to the scale of the houses that are proposed. And just to be clear that this is a hybrid application, so full application for the care home element, but an outline application for the housing. And in broad scale terms, the scale parameters of the housing is such that it's proposed that there be 2.5-storey houses. However, the first speaker did say that they'd be happy with a condition to restrict the scale to just 2-storey. But you get an idea here as to the amount of development on site. Left-hand side there, you can see that the housing development, and then you've got the care home building to the right-hand side. So if you look at the elevation at the top there, the northwestern elevation, that's the elevation that will face in the direction of the properties that bound this or border the site to the northwest, the existing houses on Premier Avenue. You get a sense there of the scale of the building. 2 stories, but really 3 stories if you include the accommodation in the roof, with windows and balconies and looking in that general direction. I won't go to the photographs. What I'll just go back to is just the layout. So you can just get a sense. Obviously, you've looked at the northwestern elevation and obviously the proximity then of the building to existing residential development to the north. Happy to take questions at this stage.
Well, I'll address my point first to the applicant, if I may, and that is that as leader of the council, I'd jump at welcoming a care home in any part of Derbyshire Dales because there's an absolute need, as we've identified. But it has to be right. It has to be right for the environment, for the heritage asset and for the residents. Question, Chris, when I first read this, I thought, wow. And then you start to read on. How many times have you sat with the applicant and tried to get this right? Have you gone beyond the point where it had to come to committee? Presumably that's your answer, yes. And we've got to make that decision. You say it's got scope for development, and may I add, I wasn't on site yesterday, but I'm well aware of all these sites over many years. It's got scope for development. Has it got scope for development as a residential home and to fit in the needs of the heritage asset and the neighbours? In other words, could we get to a point where we see the fruition of this?
Yes, to answer that question, Councillor Purdy, we have engaged in pre-application discussions with the applicant prior to receipt of this application, and we did express concerns about the amount of development and the scale of the building, in particular with particular reference to the care home building that's proposed. However, we have received this application which proposes a very similar amount of development. There has been some revisions to the design of the building, but there are still fundamental concerns about the amount and scale of the building that's proposed. Hence why we've brought this application to committee, because we've expressed those clear concerns at the pre-application stage. So we have to assess this application on its merits and judge that the applicant would want us to proceed to determination so they could exercise their right to appeal. Going back to your sort of second...
Rhetorical question.
Yeah. In pre-application advice, there is recognition that because for the members that know this area well, the Henmore Gardens development to the south, we went to great lengths to secure a swathe of open space which incorporated some mature trees and views out towards this farmhouse. And we recognise it's of historic and architectural interest and is worthy of some level of protection. However, it doesn't prohibit the potential demolition and redevelopment of the site. But what we need to ensure is that it responds to character, context and history, and it has to be of a suitable design and scale and make an acceptable contribution to its surroundings. We wouldn't rule out replacement, but it needs to be with a building that's appropriate.
Indeed, thank you.
Members, questions? Councillor Gamble.
Right, that's a question for Kerry, actually. It's a legal question. I'll just ask you. It's about the fact that we've got a full application here for a home, then an outline application for 9 houses. Are they irretrievably linked? Can we make separate decisions on the 2 applications? And then if I can, I'd like, there's comments, but I'll make them for later, shall I?
That wasn't totally unexpected of your question. So
No,
I have sort of looked into this. And whilst there are cases out there where split decisions have been made, it is not the usual procedure for these matters. And if I was advising the council, I would advise against it, because you have here 2 very fundamentally different applications for the residential side and then for the care home. And I don't know which one you're wanting to approve or not approve. So it's kind of these have been brought together, and what I wouldn't like to happen is for the development of the site for 9 houses to come forward, which, as you know, does not attract any Section 106 contributions, to then lead the way for further development.
No, in fact, really, to where my thoughts were going, I'm certainly of the mind at the moment that I think we need to give Chris scope to go back and get something that's more in keeping with the area. Personally, having seen the site itself, I don't think what's proposed at the minute suits this site and is amenable to it. But also the other thing, it just looks like a very squeezed site, and if we were going to produce something, I'm absolutely in agreement with the people who said that we need a care home for Ashbourne, but I would like to see a more spaced out, generous, if you like, application that had space around it, rather than 64 crammed in and 9, just because that makes a bit more money for the whole thing.
I mean, I don't disagree with you, but unfortunately you have to make a decision of what's placed in front of you. It's not that you can go back and say, well, we don't like what you've put forward. We will accept it if you do this. You have to do that by making a decision on the application that you've got.
So we are really stuck with, to have a care home, we've got to have the 9 homes then?
No, not at all, because the recommendation at the moment is to refuse it as it is. That gives the developer the option then to resubmit an application, taking into account the comments that that members have made, and for them to make the decision: is this would it be more favourable if X, Y, and Z was presented?
Okay, thank you very much.
Any more questions, members? Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. If this went to appeal, would it, after we've refused it because it's too big a thing, even though it's quite a nice thing, it's just a little bit too big, would the inspectorate, as it were, consider them as separate things, or would they consider it as a joint issue? And is there a chance that they would say the 9 houses is fine and the home is too big, or something like that? If it goes to appeal, will it stay as one single thing?
Whilst I wished I had that sort of crystal ball, inspectors they look at this with the planning merits of what they consider, and it would be for the officers to demonstrate to the planning inspector that that's not ideal in planning terms. But for me to say that a inspector wouldn't grant it like that, then that would fetter their the way that they work. Whether that's right or not is then subject for us to appeal against their decision.
Okay, great, thank you. There was one other little comment I could make, if that would be okay, to Mr. Ford. I did go on the site visit, and it was mentioned that the DRP had approved this as being a good design. There was no doubt. We weren't pretending that that's not what was happening.
Okay, thank you very much. So, you want questions, or we're still in questions at the moment? Councillor Slack. Well, if nobody else wants to ask more questions, then I'll move into debate. Councillor Slack.
Right, thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with the recommendation of the officers. I think the gentleman mentioned nearly 55% higher than the other properties, so it does stick out in the open countryside. It's out of character completely. The officers have got this exactly right, and I'm confident if he went to appeal, he'd stand up to appeal, definitely. So I support the officer's recommendation. I'd like to move it, Chair.
You've got to move it, Councillor Slack. So it's been moved by Councillor Slack. Councillor Lees.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to second that for recommendation for refusal, even though I do agree that we do need a care home in Ashbourne. I've lived in Ashbourne most of my life, and it is a needed part of the town, basically. It's something that's needed in the town, but on this application, I think it's far too big, overlooking the residents nearby, and you know, I'd like to see something developed on that site, similar nature, but probably 1.5 stories lower, and using probably the housing aspect of it as part of an annex, possibly. But I'll second the recommendation for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lees. Councillor Gamble.
Yeah,
you want to make any comment?
Yes, I would. Yes, is it all right? Yes, I would. I would like to support what the officer's going to do, and to reiterate the point that Councillor Bush was. We were made aware by the officer about the view about the design. Obviously, that design is always very subjective. I personally felt that it didn't suit the site. Actually, that site has a very specific feel to it, and I thought something just could be done more modest, more in keeping with that site than what was being proposed. So yeah, so that's what I would like to say.
Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, as ward member again, I think all the development happens in my ward, in Ashbourne South these days. However, I agree with what's been mentioned already. When I visited the site yesterday with the other members, I was quite amazed at the size of the site, but I haven't been in there for a long, long time. I was quite also disappointed with the actual design and the size of the nursing home, because, as Councillor Purdy said, most people in the district and Derbyshire and County would jump at care homes, and we desperately need more. I think we've got 3 or 4 in Ashbourne, that's all we've got. But that was disappointing, but at the same time, I can't see how we can, other than go with the officer's recommendations, because it's so overbearing. Bear in mind that the Red Rose side to the left and Premier Avenue on the other side, they are going to be very, very overlooked, really. If there's development on the side with housing development, then obviously a lot more care could be taken and a different sort of perspective altogether. But no, I totally agree with the officer's recommendations. After I saw what's happening yesterday, so I'll go on with what everybody else has said.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lemon. Councillor Fitzherbert.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I don't know if I do agree with everybody, I'm afraid. I think this has got merit. I mean, we talk about the scale of it. I'm just wondering if you know, the question I would have asked, really, if the scale had come in a little bit less, would the officer recommendation be different? I went and visited the site myself last week, and we desperately need to do something with that. I mean, the big empty farm building there has probably been empty for 20, 30 years now. It's right in the centre of Tom's ward. We've got to do something. I thought when I initially got the papers, I thought it was going to be more housing. I didn't realise that a care home was planned or even thought of for that particular site. So I think we've got to be entertaining this site to do something positive with it, because you know, I looked at the buildings there. Obviously, there's some heritage assets there, but if you sum up all the heritage assets in our district, to lose those, or if we can incorporate those, great. But to lose those, I don't think would be too much, considering all the other great things we are trying to preserve and do here. And I think we've got to give whoever has that site, whichever developer is, some comfort that we've got to do something positive with it, or else we're going to end up all losing on appeal or whatever. And I think we've really got to think, I don't know what the answer is, because obviously, you know, it's not going to go through tonight now, it looks like, but we've got to think about something positive, and we've got to let the developer go with some positive vibes from this committee rather than negative ones, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fitzherbert. Councillor Purdy.
Picking up on Councillor Fitzherbert's point, I'd like to make the appeal to Mr Ford. If you don't succeed, please try again. We welcome you with open arms, but with the right design that will ameliorate into the area and be conducive to neighbours. And England 2, Germany 0, by the way. So, there we go. So, yes, we're missing 40. No, please, we need to get this right. And as you've heard from all the members, we know we need care homes and residential beds. So I appeal to you to sit with our officers and try and get it right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Purdy. So it's been moved and seconded for refusal. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous, I think. All those against? 1. And no abstentions, I take it. No? So it's been refused. Thank you very much. Moving swiftly on. Item 5.3. Which is application 20/01264 out, land adjacent to Ash Cottage, Bradbourne Lane, Brassington. This is an outline application for the erection of 1 dwelling house and a stonemason's workshop and associated removal of existing buildings on site. I believe we have one speaker. It's Mr Richard Piggott. I think some of us know him, so Richard, if you'd like to come, you have 5 minutes and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you. Am I expected to keep this on or not? No. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to speak this evening. I note the officer's recommendation and the opinion that the site is located outside of the village boundary. However, this is a subjective matter, as no settlement boundary is drawn for the village of Brassington. It is opposite the village allotments, and there are dwellings immediately to the west and close to the eastern boundary of the site. Furthermore, development will be confined to the square area of land that houses the existing buildings on hard standing. The concerns of the neighbours at Ash Cottage are noted. The dwelling will be sited around 30 metres from the neighbour, a sufficient distance to ensure no loss of privacy or direct impact on this property. The business is not a noisy business, and there is no history of any nuisance complaints. However, through the grant of planning consent, it would be possible to control the hours of operation if the committee felt this were necessary. 2 indicative site plans have been submitted. This is primarily to show that there are various ways in which the site could be laid out, and that the applicant is not wedded to one particular layout. Additional screening along the boundary is possible, and the site levels could also be reduced if this were a concern in relation to Ash Cottage. All these issues would, of course, be subject to detailed consideration at the reserved matters stage. Notwithstanding all of the above, if members were not convinced that the site is located within the village, the applicant will be agreeable to a condition that the dwelling and the stonemason's workshop must not be occupied independently of one another. This would ensure that the dwelling could only be occupied by the stonemason, excuse me, i.e. Mr Smith, the applicant. This would perhaps reflect the local support of the parish council, which is based to some extent on the applicant's local connections and the opportunity to support a local rural-based business which hopes to employ 1 or 2 additional people in time. The purpose of this application is to determine the principle of development and not the finer details of design. However, members should be assured that any future detailed scheme will be high quality and will enhance the character and appearance of the area. In summary, this is an opportunity to provide a modest dwelling which will be linked to a locally based business and will contribute to the vitality and viability of the village. The site is well related to the village, and the proposal represents the type of sustainable rural development which I feel we should aspire to. As a result, I would request the committee's support in approving this application. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Richard. Very succinct. So there's nobody else on my list. There is some late representation, so members want to look at those first, and then we'll open it up. Right, has everybody read that? Everybody happy? Are you taking this one, Sarah? So,
Right, obviously we went on site to visit this one, just outside Brassington. It's outlined with all matters reserved. Brassington doesn't have a defined settlement boundary, and as such, you know, it is a judgment matter, but we have considered this, and obviously it is outlined on the plan in front of you. There are fields separating the site from the sort of built edge of the settlement, and on this basis we've considered it to be countryside where dwellings are only acceptable if they meet the essential requirements of agriculture, forestry and other rural-based enterprises. A stonemasons doesn't fall within this category. There's no functional need exists for a stonemasons to be actually on the site, and therefore refusal is recommended. Happy to take any questions.
members, over to you. Councillor Purdy.
Chair. In my comments on the planning portal, I did support Mr Smith, but I put a caveat in my mind when I asked for it to come to committee, and that is that I don't want to set a precedent by us building in the countryside. So we've got that dichotomy. So my question, Sarah, is we know Mr Smith is a local man, and you've admitted yourself there's no defined settlement, so this is probably a matter of opinion. It might be finely balanced, if I can put that to John. But I'd like to know a bit more about Mr Smith. Is there anything we can say that is totally linked to the village? What business records has he got? I don't accept the stonemasons either. They go back to Roman times, pre-Roman times, and all villages and buildings and cathedrals, you know, totally dependent on stonemasons. So I can't understand why that's not in some kind of definition. I think stonemasons were around before plasterers and electricians and so forth. We'd be lost without them. So I think that I'd want a bit more information, Chair, to also say that I also wanted to listen what other members got to say about this. Thank you.
No problem. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Same as Councillor Purdy just said, I believe from what I've gathered, this man's a dry stone wall builder, really, but he's probably very good at masonry work as well. So, but in Derbyshire, we've got a big industry now, dry stone walling. There's great need for it. The walls are falling down, and there's great need for rebuilding the walls. And it is an industry which belongs to Derbyshire, really. So, you know, we could sort of class it with agriculture and forestry, really, in one way, but it isn't at the moment, but it ought to be classed in that category, especially in Derbyshire, where there's a great need for it. So that's all, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Slack. Councillor Gamble.
I was going to say exactly the same thing. If you went in my village and said that dry stone walling wasn't agricultural craft, you'd maybe be met with some very shocked faces. I also don't understand why this isn't classed as a rural craft. He's evidently a rural person. We were told at the visit he has sheep. He obviously has agricultural landownings. I really don't understand that. Just a quick question, really, that came up from the representation, really. Does it change your opinion at all, the offer from the agent to tie it to the person? Because obviously it is, I sound it very much his just lone desire to go back to the village where I understand he was born and brought up in.
Do you want to come back on that, John?
Yeah, can I come back on that, because it's an issue of policy. Doesn't really change our view. Planning conditions can be challenged in the future, even if you were to go down the line of linking the stonemason's premises to the dwelling. If the stonemason either outgrew those premises or the business failed, we'd be left with a house in the countryside. That's the bottom line. So that's what you've got to consider. Is this appropriate infill and consolidation? Well, that normally means you either immediately adjoin the settlement, main settlement, for consolidation, or infill is a very small gap that you're infilling. Otherwise, you have to treat this as development in the countryside and decide if it's essential, and I stress the word essential, for somebody to live there to supervise some countryside activity. Classic example being the keeping of animals, of livestock. They need personal supervision from people to live on site. In my view, a stonemason's business, even though it is a rural craft, if they're doing wall building, doesn't require that level of supervision on site.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more questions, members? Councillor Buttle?
Sorry, it's not a question, it was a comment.
In which case, then I'll move to debate.
I went there and I stood in that field and it felt like it was in the countryside. That's basically where I'm coming from. So if they did an application which said, this is the countryside and this is the kind of thing we'd do in the countryside, fine. But claiming that it's in the village, it just doesn't work for me. Even though I'm absolutely in favour of people, you know, having a business and, you know, like working from home. I absolutely love those things. But it's in the countryside, it's in the countryside. So I'm sorry, I won't be supporting it. Or I'll be supporting the officers.
Anybody else? Councillor Gamble?
I'm sorry, I actually came up with a different view, actually. I did feel as if it was, to me, it did feel as if you were in the village. It didn't feel as if we walked from the centre to the village to some outlying field or anything. So that was how I felt about it. So, okay.
Councillor Fitzherbert?
Well, I had a good look at it yesterday. I'm looking at the photos I took yesterday. I'll come back to them. And I look at the responses on page 44 of the report, 5.0, Parish Town Council unanimously in support of one dwelling for this particular individual. And it's nice to hear from the agent that it can be conditioned to the individual himself. Derbyshire County Council, highways, suitable exit visibility can be achieved. Derbyshire Wildlife Trust has been provided to determine they don't seem to have any objections. Environmental Health have no objections. I believe and correct me if I'm wrong from the officers, that if, I assume the ownership is the fields around the buildings that we see in the photographs there, permitted development would allow 5 caravans on that site for 28, or in this year, 56 days a year. I would say that potentially could have more harm than what is, in my opinion, a tidying up of the site. So I accept Councillor Battle's point, but with respect, I sort of disagree with it, because I think we should be encouraging this. I think this perhaps is an anomaly in the registration, and I think we should be following Brassington Parish Council and supporting this young man. But I'll defer moving against officer recommendation until I hear the rest of the debate, if I may.
Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with what a lot of what Richard said. It really needs looking into. It is a cottage industry, stone walling, and it needs to be brought outside of forestry, really. However, I do agree though the officers, it is in the open countryside, but lots of things have developed in the countryside are not always harmful. I think this would be a very good asset to the area. I think the parish council have shown that they're unanimous in supporting it. So we've got to look at their views as well, really. So, but I won't go against the officer's recommendation because yeah. But I think we should look at it in future. I think we should look at this as more of a cottage industry, and we should make allowances for it. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Swindle.
Just very briefly, Chair, just to say that although I can't make site visits due to work, this is near to where I live. I know the site. I've driven past, had a look. And it is a tough judgment because it is in the open countryside, but it feels as though it's part of Brassington. You know, we have houses in Elton where I live, and other villages do, where the houses are outside of the village, but they still see themselves as part of that community. So you know, I can understand where the officers are coming from, and I understand where other members are coming from, but for me, I feel that this is okay. And again, listening to the views of the parish council, who are the local people, the grassroots, and they're unanimously in support of it. I'm willing to follow their lead as well. Thank you.
Nobody else down on my list to speak. Councillor Purdy.
My little preamble, whether there's anything more the officers need. Do we need as a committee to see how tied in Mr Smith is into the village, or any business records? If that's a need, do we need to defer, for example, to examine that?
Are you happy with that, John, if we defer it and look for some more information?
Is there a need for that, John?
See if we can tease it out a little bit more, so to speak.
I'll be honest with you, John, I'm minded to go against office recommendations because I do support the principle after pandemic of trying to encourage people into the business, but at the same time, I'm mindful also of, I don't want to create a precedent of building in the countryside, but I hear from the officers that, you know, we're getting various opinions as to whether it's in the countryside or not, and there's no defined settlement boundary.
No.
So I think I'm erring on the side of Mr Smith at the moment.
Can I just say something, Chair, if I may, about settlements without settlement framework boundaries? It is a judgment call, and it's a judgment call on whether something constitutes infill or consolidation. Now, that judgment call might be slightly different depending on the nature of the settlement. So I would say that Brassington is quite an agglomeration of houses. It has a street pattern and it has fairly good edges to it. There are one or two outlying properties, but it's fairly nucleated, well, without wanting to get too technical. If you went down to Longford, the judgment might be quite different, because Longford is a ribbon settlement where you might have to be slightly more liberal in terms of how you dealt with the whole issue of infill and consolidation. My worry is that if you take a leap of faith and say that this is in some way infill and consolidation, you're going to open up quite a lot of land to the same assessment in Brassington and similar settlements, where you're outside what we consider to be the main boundary of the settlement, but you know, filling in quite substantial gaps between houses. And that worries me without an agricultural justification. There isn't one here. It is a business that lends itself to being in a rural location, but equally it could be, you know, the person operating the business could live in the village or could occupy another site in another village and still successfully be part of the rural economy.
Okay.
So I've got nobody on my list, members. It's entirely up to you. I'm in your hands.
We'll have to. I'm going to have to stay with the officer's recommendations, and reluctantly, very reluctantly, because I don't want to set a precedent that does bother me, because it would come back and bite me, and that's a concern. So, great shame for Mr Smith. I applaud what he's trying to do and support what he's trying to do, but I think if we did approve, I hear what you say, John, I take notice of your professional opinion, and I accept that.
So you're moving it for refusal?
Yeah, move it.
Does that find a second? Councillor Fitzherbert? No, not for you. Does that find a seconder? Councillor Buttle?
I think I have to second that, because I think that's basically the right choice. I do have a supplementary question, as it were. Would he get planning permission to run a stonemason's business there?
Yes, in principle. If he wanted to utilise existing buildings that had you know, started to be redundant for their existing use, planning policy supports business enterprises in the countryside and takes a different line to those than it does to dwellings.
And he wouldn't need would he need a change of use to base his business there?
That would be a matter of fact and degree in terms of assessing what's already happening on site and the degree to which that you know, it's simply an element of storage and, you know, assembly elsewhere on site. So possibly.
I wouldn't like to close down his options.
Just point out
Quickly,
one thing
because I
in
was
the
going to move to the vote.
Can I just one? Sorry, it just in connection with what Councillor Buttle said, but it does say in the report, originally built for agricultural purposes, but have been used in association with the stonemasons business for the last 15 years. So presumably the stone business is working there currently. Do I understand the report correctly?
My understanding is that that's the assertion made by the applicants and his agent, that that's what's been happening on site. I don't think that's been verified by us in terms of previous visits to the site. So the statement is what it is from the applicant. If they wanted to apply for a certificate of lawfulness to get that ratified and legally put in place, they'd be entitled to do so. But I don't think we've got any history of applications on the site.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's been moved and seconded for refusal. All those in favour, please show. All those against? Any abstentions? Is it 5-all? I take it it's 5-all. So in which case I'll use my casting vote and I'll go for refusal. So unfortunately it's been refused. Anyway, moving on. Item 5.4. Yes, I'll tell you what, we'll take a 10, shall we say get back for 25 past? So you've got 10 minutes to do whatever. So yeah, everybody's back at 25 past. ought to have got Kerry on it. Anyway, thank you. Members will resume, but what I need to do now is I need to pass a motion to extend the meeting by half an hour, so I'll move it. Can I find a seconder for that? Thank you very much, Councillor Lees. Can we just have a show of hands, please? All in favour? Right. So the next application we've got is application 5.4 on the list. It's number 20/01272 out. It's outline permission for the erection of 9 dwelling houses with approval being sought for access only. Land west of Marston Lane, Doveridge. We have 3 speakers on this. So the first speaker on my list is Brian Egerton, agent, to speak in favour of their application. You have 5 minutes, and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left. So if you'd like to sit at the desk. Okay, over to you.
I express appreciation to address the committee on this minor application. The officer's request for increased housing over a wider area would push development closer to the A50 infrastructure noise source. Eminently common sense desires are to step back from the A50. The applicant has worked extremely hard in seeking a solution to the housing allocation. Under paragraph 7.5 of tonight's report, the principle of development is correctly accepted. The applicant has paid for 3 pre-applications, held a site visit, met with environmental health and submitted 2 planning applications. Since my first council contact in 2018, we are 53 months into the proposed delivery of this allocation. The applicant's long-standing desires are to give something back to the village through bungalows provision, thus facilitating much-needed homes. At a key meeting on the 4th of March 2020, the applicant was specifically advised objections were likely unless 55 decibel noise levels can be achieved in external areas plus or minus 1 or 2 decibels and to be considered in the wider planning balance. The 2019 application was withdrawn, allowing further consideration of principally noise, drainage and layout matters. With this edict and a second noise expert, we have sought correlation to this explicit requirement. This was despite the lack of defined, measured guidelines in policy DP9, other than those needing to be reduced to acceptable but undefined levels. I emphasise undefined levels. The application is on the southern, approximate 40% of the site furthest away from the A50. The SHLA envisaged 50%. The design is indicative. In line with common practice, it fronts the noise source to provide quieter gardens, and frontage properties provide a shield to those behind. This informs the design. An agricultural access to the retained land is paramount. The layout does not sterilise the rest of the site from being delivered at a later stage if appropriate. As a design result, I emphasise the majority of the gardens would experience noise levels less than 57 decibels, and 4 of the 9 dwellings achieving the 55 decibel guideline in part of their gardens. Despite this, we are facing refusal, and we are still being asked to consider the larger development. This puts the applicant in uncertain territory with very little encouragement, given greater noise issues would arise here. The applicant, during the now 5-year land supply deficit, have questioned the merits of an appeal. Adopted policy could be challenged by aggressive third-party applications in unwanted locations, not being subject to the same external local plan prior scrutiny. We sought to respect the plan-led system here, possibly at our detriment. The reference to piecemeal development is an opinion, which is as a result of the applicant merely seeking to mitigate noise matters and nothing else. The indicative design of the scheme has positive support from Derbyshire County Council's Urban Design Officer, and I flag their concluding comments before you now in paragraph 5.4. In terms of development demands, David Wilson have only 1 house to sell in Doveridge. Bellway only have 6 houses remaining. Therefore, 95% of all recent Doveridge new builds are all either occupied, exchanged or reserved. Bellway's final sale is expected before the end of this financial year. Ultimately, house buyers will decide on the suitability of a home before purchase. It is worth noting there is third-party developer interests in delivering the site. I would conclude, refusing planning permission on an allocated site without a 5-year land supply gives rise to alternative wards and their members being open to speculative applications.
30 seconds left.
In conclusion, I would respectfully ask for members to go against the recommended refusal recommendation. I thank you for the opportunity to present to members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, the next person on my list is Mr. Robert Thompson, applicant and landowner, to speak in favour of the application. Similarly, you have 5 minutes, and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you. I'm Robert Thompson. I represent the Thompson family. I'm an agricultural consultant, a former PLC director. My other siblings are Noreen, a retired school teacher, and brother Richard, who farms at Sudbury. We farm the land at Doveridge in partnership. I make the point we are landowners, we're not house builders, developers, speculators or land promoters. The land covers a 3¼ acre field south of the concrete A50. The minor application is a 1 acre development at the south end. The field is bounded by the A50 to the north and the Old Derby Road to the south. It was allocated in 2017 in the Derbyshire Dales local plan. The case offers reasons for refusal are various. I wish to speak about location, noise and drainage. In terms of location, the case officer questions the site location as reason for a refusal. This in many respects seems to contradict colleagues at Derbyshire Dales who put together the local plan in 2017 in terms of planning policy. This is an allocated site and deserves the support from the planning committee, who were presumably part of the many house development sites in that local plan. Noise. There was clear direction from the case officer and EHO about achieving 55 decibels in any new application, and there was no mention at that time about house numbers. This is the planning application in front of you today. And in support of that, just to let you know, north of Old Derby Road, there are 60 houses that sustain themselves in a noise corridor between 55 and 65 decibels. Immediately south of Old Derby Road, there's probably 100 plus houses that sustain themselves in a noise corridor between 55 and 58 decibels, not dissimilar to the delivery of what these houses are in front of you today. This is the normal amenity for Doveridge. I make a further point, there is no legal or regulatory maximum level for external noise in the 2017 local plan. I also make the point the EHO for Derbyshire Dales in a report of January 2021 neither recommends approval or refusal of this planning application. In terms of drainage, pre-1990s, the old Marston Lane ditch, which ran along the Marston-Montgomery Road out of Doveridge, took the water from 3 square miles of hills north of Doveridge. With the construction of the new A50, this road now takes all the surface water to the River Dove. The old Marston Lane ditch is gone and has now become the new Marston Lane drain. The existing ditch outside the site connects to the new Marston Lane ditch, and it's this watercourse that will deal with significant volumes of stormwater, used to deal with the significant volumes of stormwater from Doveridge Hills. The application is pursuing a sustainable drainage solution that maintains existing greenfield runoff at 5.7 litres per second and is sustainable. In summary, I make the point that there is a shortage of bungalows in Doveridge, and this application helps to redress that with 6 bungalows in it. Secondly, Derbyshire County Council Urban Design Officer recommends approval of this site on urban design grounds, saying there could be a few more homes, but the design and access is sound. The site is allocated under the 2017 local plan and also in the Doveridge neighbourhood plan. Its location is Doveridge was studied accordingly, accepted and put into that adopted 2017 local plan. As a planning committee, you'll be well aware that in early 2021, Derbyshire Dales declared it had no longer had a 5-year housing supply. This is sufficient good reason enough to overturn the case offer's recommendation for refusal and allow you to approve the minor applications for 6 bungalows and 3 houses. Thank you, Chairman, for allowing us to speak to you.
Thank you very much. The next on my list to speak is Councillor Jacqueline Allison, the ward member for Doveridge. You have 5 minutes and I'll indicate when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chair. I've come to the committee today to support the officer recommendation to refuse this application on behalf of the residents of Doveridge who have objected to it. I don't intend to repeat the compelling reasons in the officer's report supporting their recommendation. However, I would like to highlight the following to the committee. Doveridge, in the past 3 years, has grown from a village of 627 houses to 774, an increase of 147 houses, 25%. 2 large housing developments have been built in the village to date. As well as this site allocated in the local plan for 18 houses, there is a site adjacent to this on Marston Lane, Cavendish Cottage, which already has outline permission for 46 houses. If both sites are developed, the total increase in the size of the village will be well over 35%. To date, the only developer contribution Doveridge has received to mitigate the impact of these developments has been 11 affordable homes, and those weren't even restricted to occupants with a strong local connection. More affordable homes are required in Doveridge for family members who have grown up in Doveridge but now can't afford to live there. As the officer's report states, the proposed 9 houses is a piecemeal development which doesn't adequately address the plan policy relating to appropriate housing mix, affordable housing, local infrastructure provision or developer contributions. The application clearly shows an access road in the north of the site, so the only reasonable assumption is that this will be used for stage 2 of this development, given the design layout proposed, which is totally out of keeping with the surrounding properties, which are detached and set in larger plots. The consultation response from the Council's Environmental Health team says they have always had reservations regarding this developing on this site so close to the A50. The current noise levels exceed the WHO recommended levels, which means it would severely impact on any resident's ability to enjoy their outdoor space. This will impact their well-being. Over the last year, we have all recognised how important it is to have usable private outdoor spaces. I can only see the noises increasing over the coming year as the Freeport at Etwell is developed and becomes operational. The A50 is one of the main designated routes into it. Also, this section of road is still concrete, which further adds to the increased noise levels. There have been several unsuccessful campaigns by residents for the road to be resurfaced with tarmac to reduce the noise levels across the whole village. There are no plans to do this. Currently, Doveridge residents have seen a marked increase in traffic in the village, with 2 serious accidents in the last month. With 211 new homes, which on average have 2 cars per property, there will be in Doveridge potentially 400 additional vehicles coming in and out of the village. We have little in the way of public transport provision. There is a Monday to Saturday service to Uttoxeter till 6 p.m. There is no Sunday service. There is no service at all to our Derbyshire Dales market town, Ashbourne. To access any of the facilities Doveridge residents contribute towards, they have to use private vehicles. The bus services have actually decreased while the number of houses have increased. I ask the committee to support our officers and their professionalism in recommending refusal of this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. Officers, anything you'd like to come back on?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to reiterate the point that ahead of this meeting we did circulate the slideshow to members to set out the development proposal and also provide you with photographs of the site. Members will see the plan on the screen in front of them, that the application site represents the area outlined in red, and the wide land holding and the site allocation extends to include the area outlined in blue. Now, the first speaker did mention that there has been a series of pre-application conversations with officers, and there has been previous applications on this site. We've gone from a scenario of having an application for 27 dwellings on the site and to having now an application for just 9 dwellings. The allocation in the local plan is for development of 18 dwellings on this site. The concerns that we have in respect of this application are clearly set out in the officer's report, but what we're being asked to consider is development of only part of the site, which affects the ability to ensure cohesive and comprehensive development of this site, potential noise mitigation measures that could potentially address noise nuisance from the A50. We're dealing with a development of the site and trying to mitigate against impacts from noise nuisance and noise from outdoor spaces serving these dwellings, whereas we'd prefer to see comprehensive development of the site and noise mitigation which would appropriately attenuate noise from the A50. We're also dealing with a reduced site area, so it restricts our ability to consider things like sustainable urban drainage. It limits the area upon which we can deliver that on site, and we don't support piecemeal development for those reasons. You'll note that there's secondary reasons for refusal. They relate to lack of information in relation to this application in respect of drainage, and also there's noise secondary reasons there, and the fundamental piecemeal development of this site issue, which we feel can't be addressed through the application presented in this form. If members were minded to recommend approval of this application, we just need to be mindful of the allocation, and similar to the Rosarium application we considered earlier this evening, that we'd have to consider entering into a legal agreement to secure appropriate developer contributions on development of the wider site, because it would take it over the threshold for when we can seek developer contributions. Happy to take questions at this stage.
Right, members, open to your questions. Councillor Gamble.
Obviously, so the red line is where he's going to build, where the line's going to be built, but then there's a blue line. Is the blue line all in the ownership of the owner?
That's right, the blue line represents the extent of land ownership.
Has he given an explanation as to why he split the site? I mean, it's a very strange looking split as to why that's occurred. Or?
This application has been presented in this format. The reasons why it's been presented in this way are unknown to myself.
Oh, right, okay. Just the way he split it up, it looks... It's along a field boundary or something? It just, obviously, visually, it looks strange.
Yeah, I think we have to accept this as part of a wider allocation, and
so there is obviously this is a speculative sort of 9 with a view to filling out the whole blue.
There is a spur. I mean, the application is for outline permission for 9 houses, and with access being a matter for approval as part of this application, and the indicative layout does show a turning head or a spur into the remaining part of that site. So the likelihood is that would come forward at a later date, however not comprehensively as part of the
Well,
wholesale
I'll save
development of the
anything
site.
else for comments later. Thank you.
Councillor Purdy.
One would say what's gone wrong in 52 months, really. You tried to succinctly explain, Chris, but it's an awful long time from sort of initiation to now. So I've got no problem with the recommendations. I think they're correct. But I just want to be sure that from our side we've done everything possible to help the applicants in this case.
I think the fact that the site is allocated in the plan for 18 houses demonstrate that in principle there is support for development of the site. We just haven't been presented with an application to date which meets that allocation and delivers the allocation.
That was the answer I was looking for, thank you.
Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Chair. In the applicant's speech, he mentioned a sustainable 55 decibels. Now, I don't see how you can guarantee that with the volume of traffic that is going to increase over time on the A50. I don't see how you can retain that, sustain that. My thought.
Want to make any comment on that, John or Chris?
I'm happy to just accept those thoughts, Councillor Donnelly. I'm not professionally qualified to comment really on noise levels and acceptability of those.
Thank you.
Anybody else wanted to ask questions? Councillor Buttle.
This is associated really. If they put a big load of stones, you know, those big stone boxes full of rocks or big steel boxes along the side of the slip road, would they be able to take enough sound out for this to be a working site?
I mean, gabion baskets could be one option. I mean, normally what happens is you have some form of acoustic fence or some form of attenuation barrier on the boundary of the site. That might be an acceptable alternative. It's not known at this stage, and we just don't feel that it's been properly explored in terms of, you know, noise mitigation, which would benefit the wider allocation.
Thank you very much. Has anybody moved this one? Is this?
No, we'll move into debate.
I'll move the officer recommendation then.
So it's been moved by Councillor Buttle. Was that find a seconder? Councillor Gamble? Any members wanting to speak in debate? No? So it's been moved and seconded for refusal. All those in favour, please show. All those against? No? Abstentions? No. So that's been carried unanimously. Anyway, thank you very much, members. We're going to stop the meeting now, and what's left on the committee paper will go to the next committee in a fortnight's time. So thank you very much, committee members. And a very good evening, and now we can all go and celebrate England winning.